The story of Charles Michael Schwab is one of the most fascinating sagas of America's Gilded Age, a time when fortunes were built from iron, steel, and dreams. It is the story of a man who climbed from the humblest beginnings to stand among kings of industry, only to lose everything he had built. His life is a portrait of ambition, glory, and tragedy. And the magnificent mansion he left behind mirrored every rise and fall of his journey. Imagine building a home so magnificent that even the most powerful names in New York, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and the Carnegies, stood in stunned admiration. Newspapers called it the most dazzling private residence in America. Its halls were filled with light, art, and music. Yet, just a few decades later, its owner, once one of the richest men alive, would die in a small apartment, almost forgotten by the world he had once conquered. This is the story of Charles Schwab, the boy who dreamed beyond the limits of his world, the man who built an empire of steel, and the legend whose palace became a ghost. Humble beginnings in Pennsylvania. Charles Michael Schwab was born on February 18, 1862, in the quiet little town of Williamsburg, Pennsylvania. His parents were John and Pauline Schwab, hard-working German Catholics who believed deeply in honesty, faith, and effort. Life in their small wooden home was simple and modest. There was no electricity, no running water, and no luxury, only the steady rhythm of work and prayer. John Schwab, a carpenter by trade, spent his days repairing wagons and building furniture for neighbors. Pauline, his devoted wife, managed the household, cared for the children, and cooked hearty meals from what little they had. The Schwabs were not wealthy, but their house was rich in something far greater: determination. From a young age, Charles showed a spark that set him apart. He was curious about everything. He asked questions no one else thought to ask, about machines, bridges, and how things worked. He devoured books when he could find them, reading by the faint light of a kerosene lamp after long days of chores. But in the 1800s, life in rural Pennsylvania was not easy. Factories and railroads were growing, but small families like the Schwabs often struggled just to get by. When Charles was still a teenager, he left school to help support his family. His first job was at a small grocery store, stocking shelves, weighing sugar, and carrying bags for customers. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught him something he would never forget: the value of persistence. Still, deep inside, Charles Schwab dreamed of something more. He didn't want to spend his life behind a counter. He wanted to build, to create, and to lead. His dream was simple yet enormous: to rise above his circumstances and shape the world around him. A leap into the world of steel. One day, fate stepped in. As a teenager, Charles managed to get a job at the Carnegie Steel Company, owned by Andrew Carnegie, one of the most powerful men in America. The steel industry was booming, and Pittsburgh had become its beating heart. The mills roared day and night, their chimneys pouring black smoke into the sky, symbols of progress and power. At first, Charles Schwab was just another laborer among thousands. The work was brutal. Inside the mill, the heat was suffocating, and the clang of metal never stopped. Sparks flew like fireflies, and the smell of molten steel filled the air. Men worked long hours for little pay, and accidents were common, but Charles was not like most workers. He watched, listened, and learned. He paid attention to how the machinery worked, how supervisors managed their crews, and how each part of the process fit into the whole. He didn't just do his job, he studied the business. His sharp mind and natural charisma soon caught the attention of his bosses. He had a rare combination of technical skill and charm. Workers respected him, managers trusted him. Even Andrew Carnegie himself began to notice this young man with quick wit and endless energy. Within a few short years, Charles Schwab rose from a common laborer to a foreman, and then to superintendent. By his mid-20s, he was already managing one of the company's major mills. His rise was nothing short of astonishing, a new kind of leader. What truly set Charles Schwab apart was not just his intelligence, it was his spirit. While many industrial leaders of the time ruled through fear, Schwab led through inspiration. He understood people. He believed that every worker wanted to be proud of his job, and he made them feel valued. He once said, "The way to get things done is not to drive people, but to lead them." That simple belief became the foundation of his success. He walked through the mills greeting workers by name, asking about their families, praising good work. He smiled easily, laughed often, and made people feel part of something greater than themselves. In an age of ruthless bosses and harsh conditions, Schwab's kindness stood out. By 1897, at just 35 years old, Charles Schwab had done the unthinkable. He became the president of Carnegie Steel, the largest steel company in the world. For a boy born to a poor carpenter, it was an unbelievable rise, the true embodiment of the American dream. Andrew Carnegie, once his mentor, admired him deeply but also sensed his ambition. "Charlie," Carnegie once said, "has more ideas in a week than most men have in a lifetime." And indeed, Schwab was never short of ideas. He saw opportunities everywhere. When J.P. Morgan, the legendary banker, bought out Carnegie Steel in 1901 to form U.S. Steel, Charles Schwab became its first president. Overnight, his salary and stock made him one of the richest men in the country. At that moment, Charles Schwab stood at the peak of success, admired, powerful, and wealthier than he had ever imagined. But this was only the beginning. With great success came great temptation, a taste for the good life. Unlike his old boss, Andrew Carnegie, who lived modestly despite his wealth, Charles Schwab believed that money should be enjoyed. He had a deep love for music, art, and beauty. He attended operas, collected paintings, and filled his homes with fine furniture from Europe. He hosted grand dinners where guests dined under crystal chandeliers and listened to orchestras play. He once admitted with a grin, "I like to see the wheels go around, not only in my mills, but in my social life." To Charles Schwab, life was meant to be lived fully. He bought expensive cars, entertained lavishly, and traveled the world in style. He loved the thrill of the new century, the fast cars, the electric lights, and the growing skyline of New York City. By the early 1900s, Schwab had it all: wealth, fame, and power. But there was one dream left to fulfill, a dream that would define his legacy. He wanted to build a house that would stand as a monument to everything he had achieved, a home so grand that even the mighty Vanderbilts and Astors would whisper his name with awe, a palace that would make history. Building the Palace of Dreams, Chateau Schwab. When Charles Schwab decided to build a home worthy of his success, he wanted more than comfort. He wanted a symbol, a palace that announced to the world that the poor carpenter's son had risen higher than anyone ever expected, choosing the wrong side of town. In the early 1900s, the richest families in New York were racing to outshine one another along Fifth Avenue, beside Central Park. That stretch of mansions was known as Millionaire's Row. There, the Vanderbilts, Astors, and Carnegies lived behind marble facades and gilded gates. But Charles Schwab wanted to be different. He didn't want to copy other men's castles. He wanted to surprise them. So, he chose land far away from Fifth Avenue, on Riverside Drive, overlooking the wide, glittering Hudson River between 73rd and 74th Streets. At the time, that choice shocked society. The rich whispered that Riverside Drive was the wrong side of town, too quiet, too far, too ordinary. But Schwab smiled at the gossip. He told his wife, Urena Schwab, "Our home will be so beautiful, no one will dare refuse an invitation." A disagreement at home. Urena Dinky Schwab had grown up loving music, art, and city life. She adored New York's grand theaters and elegant parties near Central Park. When her husband announced they were building far away from the center of high society, she was horrified. To her, Riverside Drive sounded like exile. She feared her friends would stop visiting, and that she would fade from the glittering social world she loved. But Charles could be persuasive. He painted a vision of a palace on a hill, gardens full of roses, grand halls glowing with light, and views of the river that no Fifth Avenue mansion could match. Reluctantly, Urena agreed, and so began one of the most ambitious construction projects New York had ever seen. The French vision? To bring his dream to life, Schwab hired Maurice Herbert, a young French-born architect trained in Paris. Most millionaires of the time hired famous American names such as Stanford White or Richard Morris Hunt. But Charles Schwab wanted something that felt authentically European. "I don't want another Fifth Avenue house," he reportedly told Herbert. "I want a home that feels alive, a house that will make people stop in their tracks." The two men worked for months, sketching, arguing, revising, and dreaming. They settled on the Beaux Arts style, the same grand design used for the Paris Opera House. It was bold, symmetrical, and richly decorated. But Schwab went further. He wanted the mansion to look like a castle lifted straight from the Loire Valley of France. Towers, turrets, carved balconies, a true chateau for America's new royalty. A palace rises. When construction began, New Yorkers were stunned. On a quiet stretch of Riverside Drive, a pink granite castle began to climb toward the sky. Its walls glowed rose-colored in the sunlight. Tall towers pierced the skyline, their slate roofs glimmering like armor. Passers-by stopped to watch as hundreds of masons, sculptors, and carpenters worked day and night. The mansion slowly took shape, a blend of French fantasy and American confidence. Newspapers called it Chateau Schwab. Even before it was finished, it had become famous. Reporters compared it to royal palaces. Society pages speculated about its cost. It took 4 years and more than 300 workers to complete. The final price? Over $6 million. An enormous sum in 1906, equal to roughly $200 million today. Half went into construction and the other half into furnishings and art. The New York Times declared a mansion to surpass any other city home in America, perhaps even in the world. First impressions. Visitors approaching Chateau Schwab found themselves entering a dream. A grand iron gate opened to a curving driveway surrounded by lawns, fountains, and marble statues. At night, electric lamps lined the path, casting golden light on trimmed hedges and blooming roses. Ahead stood the main entrance, a wide staircase of white marble leading to towering wooden doors carved with bronze details. Above them hung the Schwab family crest, a symbol of pride and power. Inside waited a world of wonder. The grand foyer stretched 2 stories high, its floor polished to a mirror shine. Marble columns gleamed beneath golden chandeliers. Stained glass windows bathed the room in colors of ruby, sapphire, and emerald. Guests often paused at the threshold, speechless. Every inch of the mansion shouted success, not in words, but in the sheer beauty of its craftsmanship. Inside the palace, Charles Schwab demanded perfection. The mansion contained 75 rooms, and every door, window, and staircase was handcrafted. Over 100 artists worked on the interiors, painters, sculptors, woodcarvers, and metalworkers from around the world. Each room had its own theme, its own mood, its own story. The Grand Hall. The heart of the house was the Grand Hall, so large that voices echoed from wall to wall. A sweeping staircase curved upward like a river of marble, guarded by mahogany rails carved with flowers and vines. Above, a massive crystal chandelier sparkled with thousands of prisms. At the top of the stairs hung a portrait of Charles Schwab himself, painted to remind every visitor whose kingdom they had entered. The ballroom. Next came the ballroom, a space built for music and movement. Its oak-paneled walls glowed with gold leaf. The ceiling was painted with angels and clouds, as if heaven itself hovered above the dancers. A giant organ stood against one wall, ready to fill the air with sound. During parties, orchestras played as hundreds of guests in silk gowns and tuxedos danced beneath the lights. When the chandeliers reflected on the mirrors, the entire room shimmered like liquid sunlight. Charles and Urena Schwab became legendary hosts. Their gatherings drew the most famous people of the day, politicians, artists, and even European nobles. For a night, the Hudson River sparkled with the glow of Chateau Schwab's windows, a private chapel and hidden luxuries. Though he loved grandeur, Charles Schwab was also a devout Catholic. He built a private chapel inside the mansion, a room of marble and stained glass that glowed like a jewel when the sun poured through its windows. The altar was carved from white stone, and visitors compared the space to a cathedral in miniature. Beneath the mansion lay even more wonders. There was one of the first indoor swimming pools ever built in a private home, its tiles glimmering blue and green, Nearby were a bowling alley, gymnasium, and even a small power plant that generated electricity for the entire estate. 6 elevators connected the floors, a miracle of modern technology at the time, and early air conditioning kept the rooms cool in summer. At a time when most Americans still lived without electricity, the Schwabs enjoyed comforts that seemed like science fiction. The art gallery. Among all the rooms, the art gallery was the crown jewel, a quarter of the mansion's total cost. Today's equivalent of more than $50 million went into art alone. Paintings by European masters lined the walls. Sculptures from Italy and France stood on marble pedestals. The collection was so impressive that pieces were loaned to the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. Visitors described the gallery as a museum disguised as a home. For Charles Schwab, the gallery was not just decoration, it was proof. Proof that a boy from a small town could rise to own the treasures of kings. A home that stunned New York. When Chateau Schwab finally opened its doors, New Yorkers were mesmerized. Carriages lined up outside during evening parties, and the press could not get enough of the story. Even Andrew Carnegie, known for his modest brick mansion nearby, admitted with amazement, "Have you seen that place of Charlie's? It makes mine look like a shack." For a time, the Schwabs seemed untouchable, a couple living at the very peak of America's gilded glory. But behind the laughter, champagne, and music, shadows were beginning to form. The palace that symbolized triumph would soon become a cage of loneliness and loss. The gilded dream fades, life inside Chateau. Schwab and the Great Fall. For a while, Chateau Schwab stood as a glittering symbol of the Gilded Age, a palace of dreams overlooking the Hudson River. Its glowing windows could be seen from passing boats at night, and its ballroom echoed with the laughter of America's elite. Beneath those chandeliers, New York's most powerful men and most beautiful women danced, toasted, and whispered. And in the center of it all stood Charles Schwab, the King of Steel, the man who had conquered poverty and built his own empire of wealth and wonder. But time, like fortune, never stands still. Life at the Chateau. In the early 1910s, life inside Chateau Schwab sparkled with non-stop excitement. Charles was a man who adored company. Every week brought new dinners, new concerts, and new faces. Musicians performed in the ballroom. Artists and inventors shared ideas in the library. Urena Schwab, once the perfect hostess, glided through these events dressed in gowns imported from Paris, diamonds glittering under candlelight. She was admired for her beauty, her poise, and her generosity. Invitations to a night at the Schwab's mansion became one of the most coveted in New York. The air inside the house smelled of flowers, champagne, and perfume. The orchestra played soft melodies while guests admired priceless art and marble staircases. For a while, it seemed as if the Schwab's life would stay perfect forever. But perfection never lasts. A quiet change. Slowly, the atmosphere inside the mansion began to shift. At first, no one noticed. Urena, once the radiant hostess of New York's grandest parties, began to stay upstairs more often. She grew self-conscious about her appearance and increasingly uncomfortable in public. Some said it was her health. Others whispered that loneliness had begun to creep in. While the music played below, Urena would sometimes sit by her window, staring out at the Hudson River. She no longer wanted to attend the endless dinners and parties. Rumors spread through high society that Mrs. Schwab had withdrawn from the world, that she rarely left her bedroom. Charles, ever energetic, didn't slow down. He was always moving, always talking, always hosting. He loved the thrill of conversation, the excitement of business, and the spotlight of admiration. But as he dazzled guests with jokes and laughter, a quiet distance grew between husband and wife. They still lived under the same roof, but it was as if two separate worlds existed inside that one great house. The two lives of the Schwabs. Downstairs, Charles Schwab entertained with boundless charm. He loved stories, laughter, and grand gestures. He was known for his generosity, tipping waiters huge sums, donating to churches, and supporting orchestras. But he also had a taste for excess. He adored fast cars, horse racing, and gambling. He was said to have lost a fortune at the casino in Monte Carlo in a single night. Yet, He laughed about it afterward. "Easy come, easy go," he'd say with a grin. To him, money was meant to be enjoyed, not hoarded. Upstairs, Urena lived a quieter life. Servants brought her breakfast on silver trays. She spent her days reading, writing letters, and listening to the faint echo of the ballroom below. Once the queen of society, she now avoided the very world that had once adored her. The mansion, which had once symbolized love and triumph, began to feel like a gilded cage, a home with a new purpose. When World War I began in 1914, even the wealthy of New York felt the shock of change. Society parties became smaller, and charity took the place of luxury. In 1917, Urena Schwab stepped out of her isolation to help the war effort. She opened the grand rooms of Chateau Schwab to the American Red Cross, allowing volunteers to use its marble halls to sew clothing and bandages for soldiers overseas. The ballroom that once hosted waltzes now echoed with the sound of sewing machines and voices singing patriotic songs. For the first time in years, the mansion's doors were open not just to the rich, but to ordinary citizens working for a noble cause. For Urena, it was healing. The palace that had once been a stage for pride became a place of purpose. The Roaring Twenties. After the war, America changed. The 1920s brought jazz, electricity, and new wealth. Skyscrapers rose into the sky, and automobiles filled the streets. A new generation of millionaires, men who made their fortunes in oil, automobiles, and movies, replaced the old steel barons and railroad kings. But Charles Schwab refused to be left behind. He invested in everything: ships, real estate, and new technology. He believed the future was his. "There's always another deal to be made," he told friends with a confident grin. He threw larger parties, traveled across Europe, and filled his life with constant motion. But behind the optimism, the world was shifting under his feet. Younger millionaires saw Chateau Schwab not as a marvel, but as a relic, a symbol of a fading era. The giant French palace looked out of place in a modern city, now ruled by Art Deco towers and neon lights. Still, Charles Schwab continued to spend, to dream, and to live large. He had survived poverty. He believed he could survive anything. The Great Crash. Then came the year 1929, the year that changed everything. In October, the stock market collapsed. Panic swept through Wall Street like wildfire. Fortunes vanished in days. Banks failed. Factories closed. The Great Depression had begun. For Charles Schwab, the crash was devastating. His investments in steel, in railroads, in manufacturing, all began to crumble. His fortune, once measured in tens of millions, began to disappear. At first, he refused to panic. He sold stocks, borrowed money, and mortgaged his properties, believing the market would soon recover. But it didn't. The numbers kept falling. Within months, the man who had once built one of the greatest industrial empires in America was struggling to pay his bills. The burden of a palace, the great Chateau Schwab, once his pride, became his greatest problem. Keeping such a massive house running cost a fortune. There were dozens of servants, gardeners, cooks, maids, and engineers. The private power plant had to be fueled. The elevators and heating systems required constant maintenance. Even as his fortune vanished, Charles refused to give up the mansion. But soon, he had no choice. In 1930, he put the estate up for sale for $4 million, far less than what it had cost to build. But no one wanted it. The Great Depression had changed everything. The rich weren't buying palaces anymore. They were selling them. Mansions that once hosted balls now stood dark and empty. Chateau Schwab, too grand and too costly, became unsellable. The fall of a titan. By 1939, Charles Schwab's fortune was gone. The man who had once ruled America's steel empire now found himself nearly penniless. Servants left, rooms were sealed off, and the gardens grew wild with weeds. That same year, he finally walked out of Chateau Schwab for the last time. He moved into a small apartment on Park Avenue, bringing with him only a few belongings and memories of a life once filled with light. Neighbors described him as kind but quiet, a man who smiled politely but carried the weight of regret in his eyes. On September 18, 1939, Charles Michael Schwab passed away. He had lived a life that spanned the rise of American industry and witnessed his own empire crumble to dust. The man who once owned a palace now left behind little more than a story. The empty giant, the abandonment and destruction of Chateau Schwab. When Charles Schwab died in 1939, the world he had helped build was already fading into memory. The steel mills that once thundered under his command had quieted. The great mansions of the Gilded Age were being replaced by tall, modern apartment towers, and standing silently above the Hudson River, like a forgotten castle from a lost kingdom, was Chateau Schwab, his greatest creation and his greatest curse, a palace without a king. After Charles Schwab's death, the mansion on Riverside Drive became eerily quiet. The marble halls that once echoed with laughter and music were now filled with silence. Curtains hung motionless over tall windows. Chandeliers gathered dust. The gardens, once kept in perfect order by a small army of gardeners, turned wild and overgrown. The mansion's caretakers did what they could, but it was impossible to keep such a vast estate alive without its master. To the few who passed by, it looked like a sleeping giant, majestic but lifeless. Its pink granite walls still glowing faintly in the sun, as if remembering the parties, the orchestras, and the bright carriages that once filled its drive. Children in the neighborhood would whisper stories about the ghost house by the river. Some said they saw lights flicker inside at night. Others claimed they could hear faint piano music through the walls. The spirit of Charles Schwab still entertaining guests long after death. A debate over the future. In the early 1940s, as New York grew and modernized, city leaders debated what to do with the empty chateau. Some suggested turning it into a museum, honoring one of America's great industrial pioneers. Others proposed converting it into an official residence for the city's mayor, a palace for public service instead of private luxury. Architects praised its craftsmanship. Writers called it a living monument to an age of American confidence. But there was a problem: the cost. Maintaining the mansion would have required enormous funds. Heating it, cleaning it, staffing it, all were far too expensive for a city recovering from the Great Depression and preparing for war. When the mayor himself visited to inspect the property, he shook his head in disbelief at the gold ceilings, marble staircases, and miles of hallways. He said quietly, "It's too grand to represent the people." With that, the dream of saving Chateau Schwab was lost. A ghost on Riverside Drive. Throughout the 1940s, the house stood empty, a lonely monument to a bygone world. Weeds climbed the stone walls, rain seeped through the roof. Pigeons nested in the towers that once sparkled with copper domes. Still, it remained breathtaking. Even in decay, the mansion refused to lose its dignity. The pink granite still blushed in the sunlight, and the carved balconies still looked out over the Hudson, like watchful sentinels from another time. People walking along Riverside Drive would often stop and stare. Some felt sadness for what had been lost. Others felt relief that such excess had vanished. The mansion became a mirror, reflecting each person's feelings about wealth, ambition, and time. But time, as always, won the decision. By the late 1940s, New York City was growing faster than ever. The post-war boom brought new families, new businesses, and a desperate need for housing. The empty chateau with its massive grounds began to look less like a treasure and more like wasted space. Developers made offers, preservationists protested, but progress was unstoppable. The city decided the mansion had no future. Demolition crews arrived quietly, almost respectfully, as if aware they were about to erase a piece of history. There were no grand farewells, no speeches, no ceremonies, just the dull roar of machines and the crack of stone breaking against steel. From palace to rubble, piece by piece, Chateau Schwab began to disappear. The towers that had once touched the sky were the first to fall, their slate roofs shattered like glass. The marble columns of the grand hall crumbled under the weight of modern machinery. Inside, the carved staircases and gilded ceilings that once made guests gasp were ripped apart and thrown into piles of debris. A few people gathered on the sidewalks to watch. Older New Yorkers shook their heads in disbelief, remembering the mansion's glory days. "You don't see houses like that anymore," one man reportedly said. When the wrecking crews reached the ballroom, workers paused to stare at the painted ceiling before it was destroyed. Cherubs, clouds, and gold leaf vanishing under gray dust. By the end, all that remained was a heap of rubble and memory. In just a few weeks, the grandest home in America was gone. The Schwab house, a new beginning. But the land where the chateau once stood didn't remain empty for long. In the early 1950s, construction began on a new building. Not a mansion, but a modern apartment complex. It would house hundreds of ordinary New Yorkers, teachers, workers, and families. Ironically, the developers named it the Schwab House, in memory of the man whose palace had once stood there. The name stayed, but the meaning changed. Where Schwab once meant unimaginable wealth and elegance, it now represented practicality, affordable homes for everyday people. Some saw this as a sad ending, a final insult to a man who had once lived like royalty. But others saw it as poetic justice, proof that time evens out all extremes. The mighty and the humble eventually share the same ground. Today, the Schwab House still stands on Riverside Drive, its brick walls neat and simple. Most residents have no idea that beneath their feet once stood a French chateau filled with art, gold, and marble. But if you listen closely on quiet nights, perhaps, just perhaps, you might imagine the faint sound of violins drifting through the air, echoing from a world long gone. A lesson carved in stone. The destruction of Chateau Schwab marked more than the end of one man's dream. It symbolized the end of an era, the twilight of America's Gilded Age. The world that had built such mansions was gone, replaced by a new America built on industry, speed, and practicality. The city no longer had room for marble palaces and personal empires. It needed apartments, offices, and schools. And so, just as steel replaced wood and glass replaced stone, modern life replaced the grandeur of the past. But in losing Chateau Schwab, New York also lost a piece of its soul. The boldness to dream without limits. Legacy of a lost dream. The man, the mansion, and the American lesson. When the dust finally settled on Riverside Drive, and the last marble stone of Chateau Schwab was hauled away, New York City, barely worse, paused to notice. The world had changed. The Steel King's castle was gone, replaced by the hum of buses, the laughter of children, and the clatter of shoes on modern sidewalks. But, to those who remembered, the image of the great mansion never truly faded. It remained in photographs, in old newspaper headlines, and in the memories of people who had once seen its towers glowing pink in the afternoon sun. It was more than just a house. It was a story about dreams, ambition, and the fragile beauty of success. The mansion that time forgot. For decades after its demolition, people spoke of Chateau Schwab as if it were a myth. Old New Yorkers told stories of the ballroom that could hold hundreds, the crystal chandeliers that shone brighter than moonlight, and the gardens that rolled gently toward the Hudson River. They said the house had a soul, that it carried the spirit of its builder, Charles Schwab, in every stone and sculpture. But most of all, they remembered how quickly it all vanished. In the space of one lifetime, a man had risen from poverty, built a palace greater than any in America, and then lost it all. It was a story so dramatic, it felt like something out of a novel. Yet it was true, painfully, beautifully true. A mirror of the Gilded Age. The story of Charles Schwab and his mansion mirrors the story of America during the Gilded Age. It was a time of incredible invention and wealth, but also of imbalance and excess. Men like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Charles Schwab helped transform the United States into an industrial giant. They created steel, oil, and railroads, the backbone of a new nation. But with their success came a hunger for more. Mansions grew larger, parties grew brighter. Wealth was displayed like a badge of honor. The Gilded Age was dazzling, but it was also fragile. It gleamed on the surface, yet beneath the shine lay cracks, greed, pride, and overconfidence. And when the Great Depression came, those cracks split open. Just like the golden paint that flakes off with time, the wealth of that age could not last forever. Charles Schwab's life captured that truth perfectly. He embodied both the power and the peril of ambition. He was brilliant and kind, but also reckless. He could inspire thousands, yet he could not always control himself. He believed in hard work, but he also believed in endless spending. He was, in many ways, both a hero and a warning. The man behind the mansion. When historians look back at Charles Michael Schwab, they see more than a steel magnate. They see a man who lived every moment as if time itself could be conquered. He once said, "The man who has done something is always miles ahead of the man who says he will do something." And that was his secret. He did things. He took chances. He dreamed big when others were afraid to. Without men like him, America's great bridges, railroads, and skyscrapers might not exist. The steel he produced built cities, ships, and the very bones of modern America. Yet the same daring spirit that built his empire also led to his downfall. He lived fast, spent freely, and trusted that success would always return. When the market collapsed, so did the world he had built. Still, in his rise and fall lies something deeply human, the desire to leave a mark on the world, even if it fades. What remained? After his death, Chateau Schwab became a legend, a lost monument to a man who refused to stop dreaming. The new apartment complex that took its place, still called the Schwab House, became home to everyday families. Its hallways echoed with children's laughter instead of orchestras, and its windows looked out over the same river that had once reflected the glow of marble towers. To most residents, the name Schwab meant nothing, but to history, it meant everything. The transformation of a French palace into modest apartments became a symbol of how the world had changed, from the luxury of the few to the needs of the many. And perhaps in that quiet change, there was a lesson Charles Schwab himself might have understood at last, that even the grandest dreams must someday give way to the lives they inspire. Remembering the dream. Today, if you walk along Riverside Drive between 73rd and 74th Streets, you'll see a large brick building surrounded by trees and parked cars. It's peaceful, ordinary, a part of modern New York life. But if you close your eyes for a moment, the past begins to return. You can almost hear the sound of carriage wheels on gravel, the faint laughter of guests arriving for a grand party, and the deep hum of an orchestra tuning its instruments inside marble walls. You can almost see Charles Schwab standing at the top of his staircase, welcoming guests with that confident smile, proud, unstoppable, believing his success would last forever. Then the vision fades, the music drifts away. All that remains is the sound of the wind against the river and the soft whisper of history saying, "Nothing lasts forever." A timeless lesson. The story of Charles Schwab and Chateau Schwab isn't just about wealth or loss. It's about what it means to dream, to chase something bigger than yourself, even when you know it might not last. It reminds us that success is fleeting, beauty fades, and time erases even the grandest achievements. But it also reminds us that dreams, courage, and hard work can lift anyone from humble beginnings to unimaginable heights. Charles Schwab began with nothing. No money, no connections, no power, just a fierce belief that he could shape his own destiny. And for a while, he did. He built an empire. He built a palace. He built a life that, even after ruin, the world still remembers. That is a legacy far greater than gold or marble. The ghost of the Gilded Age. Every great age leaves behind a ghost. The Gilded Age left behind its palaces, the Breakers, the Frick Mansion, the Vanderbilt houses, and for a time, Chateau Schwab. Some still stand, others like Schwab's have vanished, but their stories remain, whispered through time, teaching each new generation that progress always comes with a price. In the end, Charles Schwab achieved everything a man could dream of, except permanence. His house may be gone, but his story remains carved into the spirit of America itself, a reminder of ambition's brilliance and its cost. The final reflection. If you ever find yourself walking along the Hudson at sunset, look toward the gentle curve of Riverside Drive. Imagine, just for a moment, a palace of pink stone standing there, towers gleaming in the fading light, windows blazing with gold. Imagine the laughter, the music, the pride, and then remember, that behind every shining success is a fragile heart, and behind every palace stands a dream that time will one day take away. But even when the marble crumbles and the towers fall, the dream remains, living quietly in stories, in memories, and in the eternal human desire to build something beautiful before the world moves on. The story of Charles Schwab is not just the story of one man, it is the story of America itself, bold, brilliant, flawed, and endlessly reaching for the stars. And though his palace is gone, the echo of his dream still lingers on the wind above the Hudson, a whisper from another age that says, "Dare greatly, build boldly, and remember, even if time takes everything, the dream is what endures." Imagine a huge mansion with more rooms than most people will ever see in their whole lives. Picture long, echoing hallways, glittering marble floors, and walls covered with famous paintings by the greatest artists who ever lived. Now, picture that same house today. Windows smashed, ceilings falling in, rain pouring through the roof, and graffiti sprayed over ruined walls where priceless art once hung. And this is Linwood Hall, and this is the story of how one of America's grandest mansions went from almost unbelievable luxury to heartbreaking ruin in less than 100 years. It's not just a story about a building, it's a story about dreams, pride, love, and terrible loss. It's about a powerful family who thought they had everything, and then watched it all slip away because of one cold night in 1912, in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. It's about how money can buy almost anything, except safety from tragedy. The ghost of a palace. Today, if you drive through Elkins Park, a wealthy suburb outside Philadelphia, and look behind a rusted iron fence and overgrown bushes, you'll see something strange. Hidden behind trees and tall grass stands a giant stone building that looks like a haunted palace. It doesn't glow with light, no music plays inside, no guests arrive in fancy clothes. This is Linwood Hall, and for more than 70 years, it has been slowly dying. When it was completed in 1897, almost everyone in America who followed high society knew its name. At that time, this place wasn't a ghost at all. It was a symbol of power and success. Built during the height of the Gilded Age, it had 110 rooms and around 70,000 square feet of space. It was designed like a grand French chateau, but made even larger and more dramatic to fit American ambitions. In simple terms, it was like someone took a European royal palace and turned the volume up. To understand Linwood Hall, you have to think about the Gilded Age at its very peak. This was the era when industrial giants in America were richer than many kings. Railroads, steel, oil, and streetcars created fortunes so huge that it's hard to even imagine them now. These men weren't just rich, they were mega rich, and they wanted everyone to see it. Andrew Carnegie had his castle in Scotland. George Vanderbilt had his Biltmore estate in North Carolina. And Peter A.B. Widener, a streetcar tycoon from Philadelphia, decided he would build his own American Versailles just outside his hometown. He chose a young architect named Horace Trumbauer to help make it real. A house built to impress the world. The numbers alone sound unreal. 110 rooms. But these weren't small bedrooms or plain sitting rooms. These were rooms with 20-foot ceilings, walls covered in silk fabric brought over from France, and floors made of rare marble from Italy. Imagine walking into a house where everything feels larger than life. The main staircase was carved from a single huge piece of marble. It rose up 3 stories and was so wide that 10 people could walk side by side without bumping shoulders. Walking down those steps in an evening gown or tuxedo must have felt like walking into a royal court. There was a ballroom big enough to host 300 people for dinner and still leave space for an orchestra and dancing afterward. There were 62 bathrooms. This was in the 1890s when many Americans still used outhouses in their backyards. At Linwood Hall, there was hot and cold running water, porcelain fixtures, and even heated towel racks. There was an indoor swimming pool with fancy tile work that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. There was a bowling alley, a gym, a private theater where the family could watch performances without leaving home. But the most astonishing thing wasn't the marble or the bathrooms. It was what hung on the walls. A palace built for paintings. Peter A.B. Widener was not just rich. He was also one of the greatest art collectors in American history. Linwood Hall wasn't only a home, it was a personal museum built to hold his treasures. Inside its galleries hung original paintings by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Van Dyck, Raphael, Donatello, Botticelli, Titian, El Greco, and many more. These weren't copies or cheap imitations. These were real masterpieces, the kind of art you expect to see behind glass in a famous European museum, not in someone's private house. In some rooms, the paintings on the walls were worth more than entire city blocks. The house itself was designed by Horace Trumbauer, a Philadelphia architect who was only 27 when Peter Widener hired him. Trumbauer hadn't gone to an expensive architecture school. He couldn't afford it. Instead, he started working at 16 as a draftsman, drawing plans and learning by watching and doing. He studied great buildings the way Widener studied paintings, carefully, obsessively, and with real passion. By his mid-20s, Horace Trumbauer had his own firm and had designed nice homes for wealthy clients. But nothing prepared him for what happened when Peter A.B. Widener walked into his office and said, in effect, "I want a palace. Money is no object. Make it magnificent. Make it last forever. Show everyone I've arrived." For a young architect, this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. How a young architect created a masterpiece. Instead of panicking, Horace Trumbauer did what he always did. He studied. He traveled to Europe with sketchbook in hand. He walked through Versailles and other French chateaux, studying the exact proportions of windows and doors. He looked at Italian palazzos, English country houses, and German castles. He filled notebooks with sketches of staircases, columns, ceilings, and the way sunlight entered certain rooms. But he didn't just copy what he saw. He combined the best ideas into something new. A neoclassical palace for an American millionaire who had grown rich not from royal blood, but from streetcars and meat contracts. The result was Linwood Hall. Imagine driving down a long tree-lined road. Slowly, the top of the building appears. Then you see the massive columns at the front. Finally, the whole 3-story facade comes into view, stretching wider than your eyes expect. Built from Indiana limestone that glows like honey in the afternoon sun. It wasn't meant to be modest or shy. It was meant to take your breath away. Inside, the entrance hall alone was larger than most people's entire houses. The floors were patterned marble. The walls rose 2 stories high, covered with detailed plasterwork. The ceiling was decorated by Italian craftsmen who had spent years learning their trade. And at the center was that marble staircase, sweeping up and splitting into 2 grand flights, so that anyone walking down it looked like a king or queen entering a throne room. Every major room had a purpose beyond simple living. The ballroom told visitors that the Widener family could entertain hundreds anytime they wanted. The grand library, lined with dark wood and tall shelves, told guests that this family cared about books, learning, and culture. And the art galleries were designed like professional museum spaces with perfect light and carefully planned views so that each painting would be shown at exactly the right angle. Yet Trumbauer also understood that a house this huge could feel cold and empty. So he designed small, cozy rooms tucked inside all this grand architecture. There were warm sitting rooms where the family could drink coffee in the morning, breakfast rooms overlooking the gardens, private studies where Peter Widener could read and think in peace. In these spaces, the house could feel like a home, not just a stage. Linwood Hall was built with the newest technology too. It had central heating powered by big coal boilers in the basement. It had electric lights, a private phone system that connected rooms, and even 2 elevators, one for the family, one for servants and deliveries. In 1897, this was high-tech living. Hundreds of workers, stonemasons, plasterers, carvers, and craftsmen from different countries worked for 3 years to bring Trumbauer's designs to life. When the mansion was finally finished, Horace Trumbauer was only 30 years old. He had already created the greatest work of his career. The house seemed ready to stand for centuries. No one imagined how quickly everything would fall apart. The boy from a bricklayer's family. To understand why Linwood Hall existed at all, we have to look at the man who paid for it, Peter Errol Brown Widener. Peter A.B. Widener was born in Philadelphia in 1834. His father laid bricks for a living. His mother earned extra money by sewing. They lived in a small house in a working-class neighborhood, like many families in the city. There was no sign that their son would someday be one of the richest men in America. At 13, Peter quit school to help support his family. He worked as an errand boy and then in a butcher shop. By 19, he had saved enough to buy his own small butcher shop. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. Then history changed his life. The Civil War broke out, and Peter Widener got a contract to supply meat to the Union Army. It was hard work, buying cattle, slaughtering them, and moving meat to army camps, but it was also extremely profitable. Widener was tough, organized, and not afraid to make hard choices. By the end of the war, he had enough money to start investing. He noticed something many people ignored. In the 1870s, American cities were growing fast, and people needed a way to travel from their homes to jobs and shops. Horse-drawn streetcars were becoming the main way to move around crowded streets. Most people saw them as a normal business. Peter Widener saw them as the future. He started buying streetcar lines in Philadelphia, combining them into a powerful system. He made them more efficient and used his sharp business sense and his political connections to gain control. When electric streetcars began to replace horses in the 1880s, Widener was already perfectly placed. He owned the lines and had the cash to modernize them. He didn't stop with Philadelphia. He invested in streetcar systems and elevated trains in cities like Chicago, New York, and Baltimore. He bought rivals, pushed others out of business, and formed trusts that cut down competition. Workers often hated him for low wages. Reformers called him corrupt. Other businessmen feared him. But Peter A.B. Widener believed this was simply how the Gilded Age worked. Andrew Carnegie dominated steel. John D. Rockefeller dominated oil. Widener dominated urban transportation. If you didn't crush your rivals, they would crush you. By the 1890s, Peter Widener was one of the 20 richest men in the United States. His fortune may have been between $50 and $100 million back then, equal to billions today. He sat on the boards of major companies and influenced banks, utilities, and industries across the country. His opinion could make or break a business. A robber baron who loved beauty. But there was something different about Peter A.B. Widener compared to some other Gilded Age tycoons. He genuinely loved art and culture. He had left school at 13, but he never stopped learning. He read widely. He went to Europe again and again, walking through museums and private collections. He didn't just buy whatever was expensive. He studied, asked questions, and trained his eye to recognize quality. He hired experts to advise him, but he also trusted his own judgment. When he decided to build Linwood Hall, it wasn't only to show off money. He wanted a home worthy of the great paintings and sculptures he was collecting. In many ways, the house was a museum where a family happened to live. On the first floor, he created public gallery rooms, specially planned to show his masterpieces: Rembrandt, Vermeer, Raphael, Donatello, and more. He wanted to live surrounded by beauty and to raise his children and grandchildren inside a world of culture, not just cash. His personal life seemed equally successful. His wife Hannah was calm and practical, running the household and raising their children. Two of their sons grew to adulthood, George and Joseph. Both worked in the family businesses. George Widener married Eleanor Elkins, the daughter of another extremely rich Philadelphia family, which joined the two families' power. Joseph Widener married Ella Pancoast, who also came from a wealthy background. Children and grandchildren filled the family tree. Names like Harry, Eleanor Jr., Fitz, and George Jr. promised a lasting dynasty. When Linwood Hall opened in 1897, Peter A.B. Widener was 63 years old and at the absolute top of his world. He had wealth, influence, a spectacular mansion, a loving family, and a collection of art that museums envied. It seemed like he had built something that would last forever. That belief turned out to be his biggest mistake, a priceless collection in a fragile house. Walk into Linwood Hall around the year 1900, and you would be stepping into one of the greatest private art museums on Earth. In one gallery, an original Rembrandt, not a print, hung on the wall, worth more than most people could earn in 10 lifetimes. Nearby, a rare Vermeer, one of only a few dozen he ever painted, looked out quietly from its frame. Van Dyck's portraits of European nobles stared down with proud faces. A tender Raphael Madonna, a Donatello sculpture, and works by Botticelli, Titian, and El Greco lined the rooms. Everywhere you turned, there was something a museum director would dream of owning. Peter Widener didn't collect by accident. He studied art history, hired real experts, and traveled to buy from old noble families in Europe who were running out of money and selling their treasures. When an important painting came up for sale, Widener could simply outbid everyone else. He focused on old masters, works from the 15th to 17th centuries. These were not trendy artists of the moment. These were painters whose greatness had been agreed on for hundreds of years. A Rembrandt would always be valuable. A Vermeer would always matter. So Widener's collection was both cultural and financial, beauty and investment at the same time. The crown jewel of the collection was a painting called The Mill by Rembrandt. It showed a windmill under a dramatic sky, and Widener paid a record-breaking $500,000 for it in 1911, equivalent to many millions today. He hung it in a main gallery so every guest would see it first. It was his proudest possession. He didn't only buy paintings, he collected Chinese porcelain from the Ming and Qing dynasties, sculptures from the Renaissance, medieval manuscripts, royal furniture, and tapestries that had hung in European castles. Almost every room in Linwood contained something rare and important. His sons shared his interest. George Widener became an expert in miniature portraits and rare books. His son Harry fell especially in love with beautiful and rare volumes. By his 20s, Harry Widener had built an incredible collection, early editions, manuscripts, and treasures that serious scholars longed to study. He dreamed of someday giving his books to Harvard University and building a grand library in his name. But the very thing that made the collection special also made it vulnerable. It wasn't kept in a heavily protected museum with guards and alarm systems. It was kept in a private home. Yes, there were gates and servants, but in the end, it was still just a house. By 1912, experts guessed that the Widener art collection was worth between $5 and $10 million, a gigantic amount back then. It was one of the finest private collections in America, rivaling those of men like J.P. Morgan and Henry Clay Frick. Peter Widener, now 78, could walk through his galleries and know that he had accomplished everything he set out to do. He had risen from a butcher shop to the top of the world. He had created a palace filled with wonder. His sons were successful. His grandchildren were promising. It must have felt like nothing could shake what he had built. And then came the Titanic, a family at the top of the world. In the spring of 1912, the Widener family seemed untouchable. Peter Widener, 78, still took an interest in business, but spent more time at Linwood, enjoying the art he had collected. His wife Hannah kept the huge household running smoothly with around 60 servants. Their son George was 50 and seemed like the perfect heir. He was a skilled businessman who had helped expand the family fortune, and a cultured man who appreciated art and books. His wife, Eleanor Elkins Widener, was intelligent and stylish, and came from one of the best families in Philadelphia. Together, they moved easily in high society. Their son Harry, now 27, was Harvard educated and obsessed with rare books. He talked constantly about building a library for Harvard that would hold his collection. Harry seemed to have the same burning passion for books that his grandfather had for streetcars and art. The family traveled like American royalty. When they took trains, they used private rail cars with bedrooms, sitting rooms, and dining areas paneled in polished wood. When they arrived in New York, the best hotels welcomed them. When they sailed to Europe, they booked first-class cabins on the finest ships. At Linwood Hall, life was carefully choreographed. Breakfast was served on expensive china. Mornings might be spent in the library or galleries. Afternoons could be for business meetings, social calls, or drives in horse-drawn carriages and, later, luxury automobiles. Evenings often meant large dinners with powerful guests. Behind the scenes, servants cleaned, cooked, and carried, making life seem effortless for the family. George and Eleanor had 3 children, Harry, Eleanor Jr., and Fitz, plus George Jr. The younger children were growing up surrounded by servants, art, and endless comfort. To them, the mansion was just home, but no amount of comfort could protect them from what was coming. That spring, George decided to take Eleanor and Harry on a trip to Europe. They would visit art galleries, buy new pieces for their collections, and enjoy Paris and London in the springtime. When it was time to return home, they booked passage on a brand new ship, the largest, most luxurious ocean liner ever built, RMS Titanic. Of course, they traveled first class, a floating palace at sea. On April 10, 1912, the Wideners boarded Titanic at Cherbourg, France. Their first-class suite was as luxurious as any top hotel. The dining room was famous for its fine food. Other first-class passengers included some of the richest and most important people in America: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidore and Ada Strauss, co-owner of Macy's. For people like George and Eleanor, this felt almost normal. These were their peers. Harry Widener was thrilled. In London, he had bought a rare book by Francis Bacon, an edition from the 1500s that he treasured. He carried it with him everywhere. On board, he met other educated passengers and spent hours in the ship's library talking about books and plans for the future. Maybe he'd start on that library sooner than he thought. Eleanor enjoyed the trip in her own way, shopping in the ship's boutiques, writing letters, and socializing. Everyone recognized the Widener name. People wanted to be seen talking to them. The trip was both exciting and exhausting. George relaxed more than he could at home. Away from constant business pressures, he could simply spend time with his wife and son, dine formally, and walk the decks under the open sky. On the night of April 14th, George and Eleanor hosted a dinner party at the ship's a la carte restaurant. The food was rich, the wine expensive, and the conversation lively. Important people came by their table. Captain Edward Smith stopped to chat. It felt like any other luxurious evening in their world. At some point, Harry excused himself. He was tired and wanted to read his precious Francis Bacon book in his cabin. His father teased him for always having his nose in a book. His mother kissed his cheek goodnight. They would see him in the morning. None of them knew that this was the last time they would be together. At 11:40 p.m., Titanic hit an iceberg. Women and children first. At first, the impact didn't seem terrifying. Passengers felt a strange shudder and a slight grinding noise, but the huge ship didn't suddenly tilt or throw people around. Many people kept eating, drinking, and talking. The ship was supposed to be unsinkable. That idea had been repeated so often that people believed it without question. But below the waterline, the iceberg had ripped open the hull. Soon, stewards moved through the ship, asking passengers to put on life jackets and go up on deck. As a precaution, there was still no screaming, no rush. People joked and wondered what was happening. In the Widener's suite, George and Eleanor prepared to go on deck. They told the steward to fetch Harry. They put on warmer clothes and coats. Somewhere in that confusion, they understood that something might be seriously wrong. On deck, the situation slowly turned from confusing to terrifying. Lifeboats were being uncovered. Officers were shouting orders. The ship began to tilt ever so slightly. The cold night air bit into faces and hands. The sea around them was black and endless. There was one rule everyone knew: women and children first. For wealthy men like George and famous men like John Jacob Astor, this rule meant something important. In their world, honor required that they accept danger so others could live. Getting into a lifeboat while women waited on deck would be seen as cowardly. An officer approached Eleanor and told her it was time to get into a boat. George understood immediately. He pulled his wife forward, insisting she had to go. She resisted, not wanting to leave him and Harry behind. She still believed this would all work out. Maybe they were overreacting, maybe they would all be rescued together. But George thought of their younger children back at Linwood Hall, Eleanor Jr., Fitz, and George Jr. They needed their mother. He told her so. He insisted. His voice grew firm. She had to go. Harry, still clutching his rare Francis Bacon book, tried to hand it to his mother so she could keep it safe. She refused and told him to keep it. She still could not accept that they might not see each other again. In the end, George practically lifted Eleanor into the lifeboat. The boat began to lower into the freezing dark. As she dropped away from the deck, she looked up. George tried to smile, to look calm and strong. Harry raised a hand and waved. They were trying to comfort her, to act as if they would all be together again soon. It was the last time she ever saw them, the night the unsinkable ship disappeared. As lifeboats went down into the water, many were not even full. People didn't want to leave the apparent safety of the huge ship for a small boat in the ocean. Some still thought everything would be fine. On deck, men smoked, talked, and pretended not to be worried. The band kept playing cheerful music. It was a strange mix of calm and panic. George and Harry Widener stayed together, along with their loyal manservant, Edwin Keeping, who refused to leave their side. They helped other women into boats. They waited as more and more lifeboats lowered away. The ship's angle grew steeper. Water reached more decks. Now, nobody could pretend everything was fine. Around 2:00 a.m., the bow of Titanic sank under the surface. The stern rose high into the air. People slipped and slid along the deck as it tilted. Some jumped into the water. George and Harry may have spoken quietly about home, about Linwood, about future plans that would never happen. Or they may have said nothing, knowing that words could change nothing. We can't know what passed between them in those final minutes. At 2:20 a.m., the ship broke in half. Lights flickered and went out. The stern, where many still clung, rose straight up and then plunged downward. The people still on board were thrown into the sea. The water was around 28 degrees. In such cold, you don't last long. Your muscles freeze. Your heart struggles. Most people die within minutes from cold shock and hypothermia, not drowning slowly. George Widener, Harry Widener, and Edwin Keeping all perished in that black, icy water, along with more than 1,500 others. Far away in lifeboat number 4, Eleanor Widener watched the gigantic ship's lights vanish into the darkness and heard the screams of hundreds of people in the water. Those sounds would stay with her for the rest of her life. Other women in the boat also watched, waiting and hoping their husbands and sons might somehow appear. Some people wanted to go back for survivors, but most boats stayed away, afraid they would be overturned by desperate swimmers. So they drifted in the cold and dark, listening until the screams finally faded. At dawn, the ship Carpathia arrived and started picking up lifeboats. Eleanor was lifted aboard, given tea and warm clothing by strangers. She searched the faces of survivors again and again. No George, no Harry. They were now 2 of the most famous victims of the most famous shipwreck in history, a widow in a palace of ghosts. Back in Philadelphia, in Linwood Hall, life went on for a short time, as if nothing had happened. Servants still polished silver and dusted paintings. The gardens were still tended. The marble floors still gleamed. No one had yet told the house that its masters were gone. Then the telegrams arrived. Peter A.B. Widener, 78 years old, learned that his son George and his grandson Harry were dead. The man who had survived countless business battles, who had built a fortune out of nothing, now faced something he could not fix or control. Money couldn't bring them back. Art couldn't change it. Linwood Hall, with all its beauty, might as well have been made of paper. 3 weeks after the disaster, Eleanor Widener returned to Philadelphia with her younger children. The newspapers had written endlessly about the sinking. Everyone already knew who had lived and who had died. But seeing Eleanor step off the train alone, without George and Harry, made the loss real for the family in a new and painful way. They drove through the gates of Linwood Hall. The same building stood there, untouched by tragedy. The limestone still shone in the sunlight. The gardens were still neat. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Inside the front door, Peter Widener met his daughter-in-law. In just a few weeks, he seemed older. The proud, powerful man was now a grieving father and grandfather. He embraced Eleanor, and the 2 people who had lost the most tried to comfort each other, even though there were no words that could truly help. The servants had prepared for her arrival. Her room was ready. Fresh flowers sat in vases. Her favorite tea waited on a tray. They wanted to make things easier, but nothing could make this situation normal. Now the house felt wrong. Everywhere Eleanor went, memories flashed around her. The breakfast room, where Harry once read through meals. The library, where George smoked and talked with guests after dinner. The galleries, where the 3 of them had admired paintings together. All of those rooms were still there, still decorated and still perfect. But the people she loved were gone. The servants didn't know what to say. Should they mention George and Harry or stay quiet? Should they pretend things were ordinary or show their sorrow? Many chose silence. It felt safer than saying the wrong thing. Peter Widener tried to distract himself with business, but it no longer mattered the way it once had. He had built an empire, and now his main heir was gone. Joseph, his other son, was still there and capable, but George had been the one most aligned with his father's ideas and interests. Linwood Hall had always been meant for George. Now, instead of feeling like a bright symbol of success, the mansion felt like a tomb, building a library from grief. While grief consumed the family, life still had to continue in some way. The younger children needed care, laws had to be handled, wills and estates had to be settled. There were endless meetings with lawyers and business partners. Eleanor Widener struggled under the weight of her loss and her guilt. She had survived. Her husband and oldest son had not. People told her she had done the only thing she could. She had followed the rule of women and children first. George had insisted she get in the boat, but logic did not erase the feeling that she had left them behind. One thing gave her a sense of purpose. Harry had dreamed of giving his book collection to Harvard and building a library. He had talked about it constantly. Now, he would never do it himself. So, Eleanor decided she would do it for him. She worked with Harvard University to design and build a new library, the Harry Elkins Widener Memorial Library. It would be large, beautiful, and filled with books, including those her son had collected. Scholars would use it for generations. Her son would be remembered not just as a victim of the Titanic, but as someone who loved learning and helped others to learn. The project gave Eleanor something to pour her energy into. It was a way to create meaning out of tragedy. Peter Widener supported the idea. He understood the urge to make something permanent in a world that suddenly felt fragile, but no building, no matter how grand, could fully heal their hearts. In 1915, just 3 years after the sinking of Titanic, Peter A.B. Widener died. Officially, it was age and illness, but many people believed sadness and heartbreak played a part. The man who had built Linwood Hall, who had collected so much art and imagined such a long-lasting legacy, left the world knowing that his carefully planned family dynasty had been shattered. Linwood Hall continued to exist. Hannah, Peter's widow, and Eleanor still lived there for a time. The servants still kept things running, but the house no longer felt like a joyful center of life. It was becoming something else, a beautiful shell surrounding pain, an expensive problem no one wants. After Peter's death, Joseph Widener inherited most of the estate. He had his own interests, his own house, and his own life. Linwood Hall had always been intended for George. Now it was a heavy responsibility. Keeping a mansion like Linwood was incredibly expensive. The taxes were high, the heating bills were huge, the staff needed salaries, the building constantly needed repairs. It was like owning a small hotel that only your family used. Meanwhile, America was changing. World War I, new tax laws and social shifts made giant houses like Linwood harder to maintain and, in the eyes of many people, more inappropriate. During the Great Depression, when millions were out of work and standing in bread lines, a house with 110 rooms and dozens of bathrooms looked almost offensive. By the 1930s, Linwood Hall had become an awkward reminder of an older era. Joseph tried a compromise. He did not move into the house full-time, but he did not immediately sell or abandon it either. Linwood became partly a warehouse for the family's remaining art, and partly a rarely used residence. The staff was greatly reduced. Whole sections of the mansion were closed off, covered in dust sheets, and left in darkness for months at a time. Gardens that once required many gardeners now had only a few workers, and wildness began to creep in. The most important paintings and sculptures were still there, but Joseph faced a hard question. Should such great art stay hidden in a half-empty private house? Or should it go to museums where the public could see it? In 1937, Joseph Widener made a major decision. He gave some of the best pieces in the collection, including masterpieces by Rembrandt and Vermeer, to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., which was being created at the time. These works would now be protected and displayed for millions of visitors. The Widener name would live on inside the museum. But this choice also confirmed something else. The original dream for Linwood was over. The house was no longer the family's central showcase for culture. Without the art, it was just a very large, very expensive old building. After World War II, things got even worse. Estate taxes increased sharply. Servants became harder to hire, since people could get better wages and more freedom in factories and offices. Society was moving away from the world that had created houses like Linwood. By the 1950s, the mansion was effectively abandoned. It was still owned on paper, but no one lived there. the staff disappeared. Windows broke and were not replaced. The roof began to leak. Tree roots cracked old paths. The once perfect house was now a giant, slowly rotting shell. A palace had turned into a problem nobody knew how to solve. Decay, vandalism, and silence. Empty buildings attract trouble. Soon, vandals and thrill-seekers discovered Linwood Hall. They climbed over fences or slipped through broken doors and explored the darkened rooms. Some were curious photographers who wanted to capture the ruined beauty. Others were simply destructive. They smashed windows, spray-painted walls, and tore down what they could. They stole anything easy to carry: fixtures, metal, smaller decorative items. They chipped at the marble staircase, broke delicate carvings, and ripped out copper pipes to sell as scrap. The same intricate plasterwork that Italian craftsmen had spent months creating was smashed in minutes by people with hammers and no respect for the past. Local preservation groups were horrified. They knew that Linwood Hall was Horace Trumbauer's greatest work and one of the finest Gilded Age mansions left standing. They wrote letters, gave talks, and tried to raise money. They begged the Widener heirs to sell or donate the house so it could be saved. But the situation was tangled with trusts, taxes, and legal issues. The family either refused or delayed, saying it was complicated. Meanwhile, the weather kept doing damage. Every time it rained, water leaked through the roof into upper rooms. It soaked into wood, caused mold, and made plaster fall. In winter, water froze and expanded, cracking stone and concrete. Year by year, Linwood rotted from the top down and the bottom up. By the late 20th century, large parts of the roof had collapsed. Some floors were so weak that anyone walking on them risked falling through. The basement flooded regularly. The once bright ballroom looked like a bomb had hit it. The gardens turned into a small forest. Urban explorers posted haunting photos online. Grand staircases covered in graffiti, ballrooms full of rubble, long hallways open to the sky. People around the world were shocked that such a rare and historic building was being allowed to rot. But shock did not fix the roof. The ruin no one can quite fix. Standing outside Linwood Hall today feels a bit like standing at a crime scene. The ornate iron gates are chained and rusted. The driveway is cracked and overgrown with weeds. Trees and bushes block the view, as if the house is trying to hide. When you do finally see the building, it's heartbreaking. The stonework is stained dark with dirt and moss. Most of the windows are broken or boarded up with rotting wood. Parts of the roof are gone entirely. In some places, you can look through a hole in the roof, through collapsed floors, and see the sky from the ground level. Inside, the damage is even worse. The entrance hall, once polished and perfect, now has cracked and stained floors. The silk fabric that once covered the walls hangs in shreds or has vanished entirely. Spray paint covers many surfaces. Not beautiful murals, just messy tags and rude words. The famous marble staircase still stands because marble does not rot, but it is scarred with chips and graffiti. Some of the carved balusters are broken or missing. The ballroom floor has partly collapsed into the basement below. Birds and animals come and go through broken windows. The art galleries are empty. The special lighting that Trumbauer designed means nothing now. There is no electricity, no paintings, only damaged walls and shattered glass. Rain and snow fall through broken skylights. The library where George and Harry once talked eagerly about books is one of the saddest spaces. The shelves are still there, but warped and moldy. The books they once held have long since been given away, sold, or moved. The room that once held conversations about rare editions and future libraries is now filled with silence and mildew. Below the main floors, the servants' areas and mechanical rooms are filled with standing water. The old heating system is a pile of rust. The kitchens are stripped bare, every valuable metal fixture torn out. Outside, the formal gardens are a jungle. Paths vanish under dead leaves. Fountains are broken and filled with trash. Statues have been smashed or stolen. The carriage house and staff quarters are collapsing. Again and again, preservationists have tried to find a way to save Linwood Hall. They got it listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which makes demolition harder, but that doesn't bring in money. Developers have looked at the property and done the math. To restore the mansion, they would need tens of millions of dollars, maybe 50 million, maybe 100 millionths or more, and then they would still need to find a use that would bring in enough money every year to keep it alive. The location makes things harder. Linwood Hall sits in a quiet Philadelphia suburb, surrounded by regular houses and streets. It does not have thousands of acres around it, like Biltmore. It can't easily become a resort or huge tourist attraction with hotels and wineries. Turning it into condos would be extremely difficult and expensive. Turning it into a museum would require constant funding. Local neighbors are frustrated. The building is dangerous and ugly in its current state. Teenagers still try to sneak in. One day, someone could be seriously hurt by a falling ceiling or collapsing floor. But the town does not want to take ownership of a giant ruin that could cost more than its entire budget to fix. So, for years, Linwood Hall has been stuck. Too important to tear down, too damaged and expensive to restore, and too legally complicated to easily sell. It's like a patient kept alive on the thinnest thread, slowly fading away while everyone argues about what to do. A last chance and a hard question. In recent years, a businessman named Richard Yoon, or similarly spelled, depending on the source you read, stepped in and purchased Linwood Hall with a plan to restore it. The idea is to bring the building back to life as a museum and event space, and to build other structures nearby to help pay for its ongoing care. The project is enormous. The house needs a new roof, new windows, new wiring, new plumbing, new heating and cooling, and serious structural repairs. The plaster and marble need careful restoration. Every system that makes a building livable has to be rebuilt. The price tag could easily reach or pass 100 million. If it works, Linwood Hall may once again be filled with light, music, and visitors. It will never again be the private home of a single family, but it might become a place where people come to learn about the Gilded Age, architecture, art, and the Widener story. But there is a hard question here. Should it be saved? Some preservationists say yes. They argue that Linwood Hall is one of the last and greatest examples of a type of mansion that almost doesn't exist anymore. It is the masterpiece of Horace Trumbauer, a man whose work helped shape American architecture. Letting it collapse, they say, would be like throwing away a piece of our cultural memory. Others say no. They point out that the same amount of money could save many smaller historic buildings across the country. They note that Linwood Hall stood empty and abandoned for decades, while so many people needed housing, or schools, or hospitals. They ask if spending so much to restore a symbol of extreme wealth is really the best use of limited resources. There is no simple answer. What is certain is that Linwood Hall stands for more than stone and plaster. It represents the rise of a man who came from nothing and built a vast fortune. It represents the Gilded Age belief that wealth and beauty could build a sort of personal paradise. It represents the way tragedy can smash even the strongest seeming lives. Peter A.B. Widener tried to build for eternity. He got less than 1 century before his dream house became a ruin. His son George and grandson Harry died in a single terrible night aboard Titanic. The mansion they were meant to inherit died slowly over many decades. One death was sudden and shocking. The other was slow and silent. America's forgotten Versailles. People sometimes call Linwood Hall America's forgotten Versailles. In some ways, it fits. Like the French palace, it was built to show the world what power and money could do. Like Versailles, it was filled with art and fine craftsmanship. But there is an important difference. When we look at the real Versailles in France, enough time has passed that the pain behind its history feels distant. The palace has become a museum, a beautiful relic of another age. We can enjoy its rooms without thinking too deeply about the suffering and inequality that made it possible. Linwood Hall is too recent for that kind of forgetting. It reminds us that these huge houses were built in a country where many people struggled just to survive. It reminds us that extreme wealth and extreme poverty existed side by side. It reminds us that the people who lived in these mansions were not simple villains, but complicated human beings who loved art, loved their children, and still could not escape heartbreak. We are often uncomfortable with stories like this. They don't fit easy categories of good and bad. It's easier to demolish the building or to let it rot and pretend that part of history never happened. But there is value in remembering. When you stand outside the rusted gates and look through the trees at this broken giant of a house, you are seeing more than cracked stone and broken glass. You are seeing the end of an era and the limits of wealth. You are seeing how quickly a perfect life can crumble, not only in a single night on an icy ocean, but slowly, quietly, over years of neglect and inaction. Peter A.B. Widener wanted Linwood Hall to stand for 1,000 years. It barely survived 100. The story of Linwood Hall is tragic, not because it burned dramatically or was blown up in one loud moment, but because it died, the way some dreams do, piece by piece, roof tile by roof tile, window by window, while people watched, argued, and did nothing. It is America's forgotten Versailles, rotting in the suburbs, caught between the past and the present, waiting to see whether it will be saved or whether time will quietly finish the work that tragedy began more than a century ago.